Hello, and welcome back to the Rawkode Academy. I'm your host, David Flanagan, also known across the internet as Rawkode. Today, we are taking a look at a API developer platform called WunderGraph. And to guide us on today's journey, I am joined by the founder, Jens. Good evening,
Hi,
Jens. How's it going?
good evening. Nice
Are
to
you
have
well?
me on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited. I always love to play with really cool technology, and I think what makes this extra special is like I was actually playing and experimenting with WunderGraph before we even discussed doing a session together, and I was like, this is really cool. Like we need to show this to people and share it. So, before we talk about WunderGraph and what that is and get started with the hands-on demo today, could you just give us the TLDR on who is Jens, what you're up to, and anything else you wish to share?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Jens, the founder of WunderGraph. I'm 34. I have two kids, Leonie and Yannick, 1 and 3, which are also in my avatar. I think like family is probably the most important thing in my life. Plus WunderGraph, like I have like 3 kids, if you want to say so. But yeah, I think the TLDR and the important bit here is why WunderGraph. And if you look at my career, I started actually as an entrepreneur. I never studied computer science or anything. I wanted to build a startup at the early age of 20 something. I just wanted to build a startup, and there was nobody who could build me an iOS and an Android app. So I just had to learn it myself. So there was a guy on YouTube called Slide Nerd from India with the classic Indian accent. I learned Java from him, and it was such a pain for the first couple of months because I just didn't get computing and programming. And yeah, but eventually this whole thing, it turned into an app. I learned iOS programming and Android. Later, I switched to React Native. I built my backend first in Java. Then I learned about Go. Yeah, that startup eventually failed because startups are hard and we didn't have a clue, but we learned a lot. And then, yeah, I started like a regular career as a programmer, turned architect, team lead, and through that career, I kind of learned the complexity of actually working with APIs. And at the last big company I worked for, we had to integrate like 30 different services, and it was a huge pain in the ass. And we built our own REST APIs and somehow cobbled everything together, the different protocols and different APIs, and it was a real mess. Uh, and then I joined an API management company, Tyke, where I learned a lot about API gateways, how they work, what they do, etc. I was like 2.5 years at Tyke, and I found that there's a lot of like full stack developers that don't know enough about API management, and API management doesn't know enough about full stack developers. So what I wanted to create is a developer experience that puts together full stack development, API management, and API integration. So I wanted to build a tool set where full stack developers feel home. They get the capabilities of an API gateway without actually or without having the feeling of using an API gateway. Because if you talk API gateways like Tyke, Kong, Apigee, and so on and so forth, these tools, they are usually designed for ops people. Like you have a dashboard, you configure it. It's like very heavyweight. Introducing an API gateway to your stack, it's a complex thing, and it completely changes your architecture. So what I wanted to create with WunderGraph is a simplified architecture where you leverage capabilities of an API gateway, but it still feels like you're just doing full stack. So when you use WunderGraph, it looks more or less or very similar to something like Next.js, but you actually have an API gateway, you have a backend, you can put custom code, And you have a lot of functionality that helps you with API integration, that integrates with your identity providers, that solves a lot of enterprise use cases when you want to scale something that you would not normally find in a framework like Next.js. But it's it's kind of like a special developer experience if you have some experience in the market and what kind of tooling and patterns can be used. I would say it's kind of like a combination of Next.js, a backend for frontend pattern, and an API gateway all together in one user experience. It's all TypeScript. So we use Go behind the scenes for performance reasons, but the user experience is TypeScript, so everything is configured in TypeScript. We use infrastructure as code patterns, so there's no GUI, there's no dashboard, because developers don't like to click around. They want to code, they want to put their stuff in Git. And yeah, it's kind of like everything I hated throughout my career, I try to do better, and the result is WunderGraph.
All right, awesome. There is a lot to unpack there, so thank you for
Yes.
sharing all of that. What I'll say is, I also have 2 young kids, 4 and 1, so I feel your pain, and I couldn't imagine trying to build a startup with kids that young. It must be tough, but awesome. I
Can I
also
comment on that?
of course, yeah.
You know, the right time, like the right time to lose weight is never. The right time to have kids is never. The right time to start a startup is also never. You just have to do things. Like, you know, if you have kids and you're like, should I start a startup? The answer would usually or always be no. Just go to a corporate. And I just said, like, fuck it, we're gonna do this. Like, you know, I sometimes in your life, I don't know who else feels like that, but sometimes in your life, you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I cannot work at a company anymore. I must do this. This is my mission. Like, WunderGraph must exist. And yeah, that's just my personality.
Yeah, awesome. Well, congratulations. I wish you all the best of luck, but I know you're not going to need it because I played with WunderGraph and it's fucking awesome. So, I also quit my job in September saying fuck it as well. But, you know, it's not a startup. You know, I'm just a consultant, I guess. So, no, it doesn't feel as risky when it's just me. Anyway, back on track. I don't even know where we were anymore. Yes, you were talking about loads of cool technologies. So you mentioned Go. So I'm a big fan of Go. I'm a even bigger fan of TypeScript, and I am a huge advocate of everything as code. The job I quit was from Pulumi, so I spent the last year of my life doing infrastructure.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Pulumi is big inspiration for WunderGraph because when I saw Pulumi, I was like, hey, I can create a bucket and I can create a service all by writing some TypeScript, and then I do Pulumi up, and I was like, this is what we need for WunderGraph. It's interesting. I didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, I've been infrastructure as coding everything for many years. I've been using, TypeScript as a language for defining Kubernetes objects for years. Prior to that, I was using Terraform. I'm playing with CDK, TF. Anything that I can describe stuff as code makes me a very, very happy person. Even things like Prisma, although it's not directly code, but that DSL for database migrations, I think is very cool. So yeah, when you say this has got an API that gives you that API as code kind of mentality or infrastructure as code mentality to work with your APIs. It's something that I'm very passionate about. Another project that I've been exploring a lot lately is Dagger, which is CI/CD pipelines as code as well, using TypeScript. I always seem to come back to TypeScript because, and I'm assuming this is one of the reasons that you probably picked it for the project, it's got that right balance of approachable and accessible with the type semantics. Like, you don't have to go learn the borrow checker or Rust, for instance, to get a strongly typed system. And TypeScript works really well. I think it's a nice language for people to learn some of these more complex intricacies of type-based systems. So.
Yeah. No,
Sweet.
it's an interesting topic because I actually like to talk about Rust, Go, and TypeScript. So, for example, the gateway of WunderGraph, it's written in Go, and I think it's the perfect language because Go has this balance between it's crazy fast, and most of the time you get it right. You don't need a borrow checker. Borrow checkers are for super smart people who solve crazy hard problems. We're just building an API gateway. Yes, it's hard, but it's not at the hard level. Like it's, we're not building an aircraft or a tank. We're just getting HTTP requests. Go is perfect because it's much easier to. I feel super productive in Go. Whenever I try to learn Rust, I feel very stupid. And TypeScript, on the other hand, Go is great if you do like backend stuff. But if you want to do something with a user interface, or if you want to create code with a user interface, like code as the interface, I think TypeScript, with its rich generic capabilities, it's the perfect language for a user interface. If we think, not buttons, but for developers, the user interface is the language. And I think TypeScript is actually the best language to create amazing developer experiences. That's my love for TypeScript. So everything that should be super fast, I would say Go. Everything that should be pleasant to use, TypeScript. And everything that should be super safe, I would go Rust. But yeah, for us, API Gateway, Go is safe enough, I would say.
Awesome. All right. Well, I don't want to just keep talking about programming languages all day, although I'm more than happy to sit and talk about all three of those for the next 3 hours. Sure. I do want us to kind of focus on WunderGraph and get hands-on with it. So we'll start the demo in a few more minutes, but maybe we can give, you've kind of talked about what it is or what you're trying to achieve with it, but maybe we could be very specific. What is that use case that people should take away from today about why they need to start using WunderGraph?
Yes. So I think one thing, that's what I learned in my career. One thing that is probably true for every application is, or every web application, you usually have a front end, you have a backend, and your backend doesn't talk to a single database. That's almost never the case. What's more likely is you have front end, you have backend, and the backend talks to, hi Jamie, by the way, the backend talks to a database and a couple other services. Those could be internal services, those could be partner APIs, those could be third-party services. And one thing that's like front-end center to WunderGraph is the idea of, we have an opinion on how you should put together APIs. And what that opinion does is, kind of like Laravel, when Laravel was enough, you had a structure of, this is how you write a controller, and you knew what to do, and this is how you do a migration. And what we do with APIs is kind of like we're completely in the Stone Age, because if you add APIs to a project, it's kind of like implicitly managing dependencies. And for code, like Go, we have Go modules. In Java, we have Maven. And in Node.js, we have NPM. And for APIs, we have nothing. We just do a fetch to Stripe, or we import an SDK. And WunderGraph has an opinion here. We say, we're not just an API gateway, we're not just a framework. We try to be a package manager for APIs. And that changes everything, because WunderGraph has the concept of API dependencies. So in WunderGraph, you can add APIs as dependencies. WunderGraph turns all your API dependencies into a virtual graph, which is simply a GraphQL API. And now you can treat all these API dependencies like a GraphQL API that only virtually exists, because the moment you write a GraphQL query, we turn it into a JSON RPC API, because we treat security, like security is super important for us. I think most people shouldn't expose a GraphQL API. So we kind of only use GraphQL on the server, similar to SQL, to talk to your API dependencies. And that's, I think, the outstanding thing. That's the USP. That's what makes WunderGraph so different than anything else.
Okay, I'm going to try and summarize that, and if I get anything wrong, please correct me.
Yeah.
So, WunderGraph gives me the ability to define external APIs as dependencies. I'm assuming I point to some sort of GraphQL API for introspection. I point to an OpenAPI specification document to understand that API. I don't know if it supports other stuff. I know there's database support as well. Those all get created or exposed as a virtual graph, and the interface for me and to other people to that virtual graph is GraphQL. However, you're parsing that GraphQL and then speaking JSON RPC to all the underlying APIs below. Was that correct? Did I get anything wrong there?
Almost. So
Almost.
obviously we talk the language of the origin to the origin.
Yeah. Okay.
But what we do is on the front end side, we create a JSON RPC API, and we also have an embedded code generator. So you define an operation like give me countries, give me weather, and combine that. And from that, we generate an RPC endpoint, and we generate a typesafe client. Because one thing that I always found weird is, GraphQL is amazing because it's so dynamic and you can query whatever you want. But the moment you deploy something to production, you will never change your queries because your queries are not dynamic. Like you have variables where you can put an input at runtime, but if you have a view with your user info view, you don't change the user info query at runtime. So why would anybody want to expose a dynamic API if you don't need a dynamic API in production? That's insecure. That's just making the attack surface bigger. So that's why WunderGraph by default just exposes JSON RPC, and that's amazing because from JSON RPC we can also generate an OpenAPI spec. We can generate a Postman collection. So that means you add like 3 API dependencies, you create a couple of operations, you deploy that, and now you have a Postman collection, and you can give that to someone who wants to use your API. That means they can just load it in Postman, play with your API, and they don't have to learn GraphQL, because I think a lot of people just want to use your API, and there should be as little friction as possible. And not everybody wants and not everybody will learn GraphQL.
All right, last question, and then hands-on, I promise. So you mentioned something earlier, backend for front-end. Now,
yes.
I think this is a term that I definitely am not that strong with, and I'm assuming maybe other people in the audience may not be that familiar with it or understand what you mean by that, but could you tell us a little bit more about that pattern?
Yes. So like a very common pattern in enterprise architecture is you have internal and external services, and then someone says, we need a new project, we want to build an app, we want to build a website. And what you usually do is you don't let this website talk to all the services, internal and external. Instead, you create a backend for frontend, so a specific backend for this frontend, and it will supply the capabilities that only this frontend needs. And it's a very popular pattern. The problem is, if you look at frameworks like Redwood.js and others, those always assume we have a database and we're building something from scratch. And it's not optimized for the use case of we already have APIs like Stripe and Twilio and our database and Kafka and whatnot. And now we need an opinionated framework to build a BFF. So WunderGraph is optimized for this use case where you say, okay, I want to create a new front end, and we already have a couple of services, because obviously everybody can build a backend for front end from scratch. Just use like Fastify or whatever you want, and then combine the services and do it manually. But the question is, do you actually want to invent the right kind of patterns? And do you want to think about how to actually build a BFF? Or do you want to build on top of a framework that thinks about this topic for a couple of years, and the makers behind that, and figured out what are the important bits to do this in an efficient way? And this way you can not write a lot of code. Like from our business perspective, I think as a business, it's always super important to write as little code as possible that has nothing to do with your business. And inventing patterns to create BFFs, that shouldn't be, like, you shouldn't be doing that. Just built on top of something that already works.
Sweet. On that, I think we'll go straight over to the screen share and we'll start showing people what WunderGraph can do. Let's see.
What did we decide on again? Like, it's going to be you, right?
Yes, I think we agreed that I will do
the
typing,
okay.
And we're going to work through some of the examples, because there are quite a few, in the WunderGraph model repository.
Yes.
So I've got the website here, and people can find it at wundergraph.com. There's a whole bunch of documentation, but I think we're going straight to the GitHub repository. So let's get that cloned. What's the org name? Is it just WunderGraph?
Yeah, WunderGraph, and then WunderGraph again. And by the way, one thing I can mention is WunderGraph is 100% open source, Apache 2.0. We believe in a healthy community, and yeah, there's no enterprise version or anything. So everything we talk about, you can run it on your own. You can debug everything, the Go part, the TypeScript part. Everything is available.
Cool. But you are launching WunderGraph Cloud, right? To make it easier for people.
Yeah. So what we do is very similar to Vercel. WunderGraph, the framework itself, I would call it like the Next.js for backend, and WunderGraph Cloud is like the Vercel to make it easy to not do anything, just focus on coding.
That's my preferred approach. So, are we working through this examples directory?
Yeah, so we have one example that's Next.js TypeScript functions. So we recently added TypeScript functions, which I think is so cool. So you can go to that, and then you can npm I, and I think npm start, and we should be good. Yeah. Let's try it out.
All right, so we have something running on. Oh, it's opened at Forest. Never mind.
Yes, so that's our usual starter package. So we already have an operation running on the main page. That's Next.js, and we have WunderGraph running behind the scenes. So that means we have two services running, and yeah, maybe you want to explore it a bit.
Okay, so I'm not sure what I'm looking at. I'm looking at a Next.js website that is speaking to the WunderGraph API proxy.
Mm-hmm.
And if I push refresh, I don't really know what's happening. So maybe you can.
Yeah, if you push refresh, it just validates for
true,
1 nanosecond. Yeah, but the SpaceX API, I think it's static. It's just a popular example when you use a GraphQL APIs, and that's why we put it here.
Yeah, so this is calling the Dragon's operations endpoint on some service.
Exactly.
All right, let's take a look at the code. Maybe that will help me. Okay, so when we push the refresh button, we're calling dragons.mutate dragons is using use query from the WunderGraph generated SDK, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the operation dragons is coming from, but I'm assuming there's something in here that defines that, probably in the GraphQL schema.
Is there a .WunderGraph directory somewhere?
There is. It's just very small because the size of the explorer, but it is here. Yeah, and I see operations.
Okay.
Okay, so you're proxying the SpaceX API.
Correct.
Okay.
And here's something interesting. If you look at line 2. Yeah, you can make it a bit bigger. That would definitely help the audience. You see that? Okay, I don't know if you know the SpaceX API, but the SpaceX API itself, it has the root field dragons. But here we see SpaceX_dragons. And if we go to the wundergraph.config.ts, we can get some hints why this is happening. So here we are introspecting the APIs we're using. Dragons, that's from the SpaceX API. And one concept we have is API namespacing. So when we started exploring, like this is kind of like, I don't know, a year ago or something, when we started exploring to automatically combine APIs, what we quickly found is that, when you try to combine multiple APIs, you run into naming collisions. And so to mitigate that and to not have the user manually change APIs or have to rename stuff, you can put each API into its own namespace. And this way it's isolated. So that means if you go to the generated folder, we can actually look at the resulting GraphQL schema. When we combine everything, there's a GraphQL schema file somewhere. It's the only GraphQL file, yeah. And then if you go to the search for the type query, then you can see our entry points. Yes. And here you can see, okay, we have the SpaceX APIs. And if you scroll a bit more, then you see here's countries and then weather. And each of them is in their own namespace. TypeScript. GraphQL has no namespacing by itself. So we can fix that on our own.
Okay. Do you expose like GraphQL Playground, a graphical or anything like that for me to play around with this?
Yes, you can go to localhost port 9991/GraphQL.
Okay, cool. So if I type query, and I'm assuming the documentation. Oh, nope, wrong button. How did you get the documentation to show up?
Good question.
There we go.
Here. Yeah.
So I could query SpaceX ship, and I don't know why my autocomplete isn't working. It normally works on this. Ship. Oh, ships. Okay, let's do ships. Name. So this is a list of all the SpaceX ships, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can get active, class, what else? Mission. Oh no, that's going to be a nested object, and I don't want to have to find the docs for it. So let's do this. Cool. So let me try and understand then. This GraphQL starter thing that we have here is configured by the .WunderGraph directory, where we have this operations file. Nope, not that one. Where was that API namespace stuff?
WunderGraph config TS.
Yes. So here you can define any GraphQL API, have it introspect it and then make it available over one single API endpoint. This is what this demo is showcasing, how we could speak to a country's API, a weather API, and a SpaceX API, expose them over one API for you to query.
Yes, and if you make like a new line here and you type introspect and dot, you can see we can also introspect Apollo Federation, MongoDB, MySQL, OpenAPI with a file. So we could supply an OpenAPI file, and then PlanetScale, Postgres, SQLite, and SQL Server.
Okay,
so these are the compatible data sources we can introspect and add to our virtual graph.
Nice. Okay. So not just GraphQL. I could speak to a whole bunch of databases, Postgres and MySQL being pretty popular. PlanetScale's in there too, and I guess MongoDB for people playing with Atlas. Yeah, it's pretty neat. So you mentioned like these get versioned. Like, how are these versioned? Like you talked about them as, sorry, not versions, but as dependencies, right? So is this what you mean when we say we bring this in as a dependency?
Yes. So you introspect them here, and then at the bottom in line 30, you see configure WunderGraph application. And here we can add our APIs, and then we can configure code generators, cores for our API gateway. We can configure authentication, security. For example, here we can enable or disable the GraphQL endpoint. And yeah, at the end of the day, this gives us our API gateway. But as I said before, you almost don't notice that you're using an API gateway.
Okay. So I'm curious, because this was obviously an example from your repository. If I am a developer tomorrow and I want to bring WunderGraph into my application, how much of this is generated and how much of this is stuff that I need to type to, provide the boilerplate and the glue for this to work?
Yeah, so the generated folder is generated. What you need is the WunderGraph config TS and the operations TS. And I think there's a third file. It's just a bit small. Here you can configure defaults for your operations, for example. Yes. And this one is the hooks configuration. So for example, if you want to do something before or after the Dragon's operation is being called, you can define hooks here using TypeScript, and then you can hook into the lifecycle of an operation. So we have a command, I think it's something like wunderctl init or something similar. I think create WunderGraph app init, and that scaffolds you these couple of files. And that's more or less what you need. And the rest is just, npm start, and everything else is generated. So it's pretty lightweight.
Okay. What are these operations then? Like, if we've already introspected the remote APIs and we've got the ability to query them, what is the operation? Is that us constraining the different types of queries, or I don't know. I'm not going to guess. I'll let you go.
Yeah, the operations folder defines our JSON RPC router. So, for example, we have in the root, we have, I don't know, it's so small. It's like countries, right?
Yep. Countries, dragons, and weather.
Okay. So if you open a curl in terminal, and you do http ://localhost 9991, and then /operations, and then dragons. Yeah, with capital D, sorry. Now we're calling this file, more or less. Or we're calling the operation that was defined in this file.
Right, okay. So,
and you could also, do you have a Postman installed, by the way?
No.
No. Okay. That's unfortunate, but I can just tell you, if you go
Well, I
to the
mean, I'm fairly
generated
sure I
folder.
could do a brew install Postman.
Okay.
It won't take long.
Yeah. Mm. We can use the time. Go to your playground where you created your own operation, because you can have your own operation. So copy this thing here.
Yep.
Yes, and now go to the operations folder, create a new file, and let's call this ships or whatever you want inside the operations folder, right? Yeah. Ships.graphql. That's the convention. Okay, save it. Great. And now let's call ships in curl. Rawkode. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Yeah. Okay. So that's the bit of information that I think was important there for me, is because when we have this graphical playground, the GraphQL playground style setup, we can make any arbitrary query we want against any of the APIs that have been introspected and are made available via the proxy. But actually,
exactly.
really what developers should be doing is defining all the different queries as operations and consuming them from the RPC API instead,
Yes.
rather than speaking directly.
Because
Yeah.
go to the front end code, like the where you called the Dragons API from the front end. Yes. So when you go to operation name and you remove Dragons and you trigger auto completion.
Oh, hey, that's cool.
That's Rawkode. And now, if you check, for example, in line 10, you make a new line and you check what Dragons contains data. And you see what data is actually inside this thing.
Hey, that's pretty nice.
And you know, now the audience would think, yeah, Jens, code generation exists. Da la la. Sure, everything exists. It's just a question of, do you want to care, or do you want to have something that just works and that figured out all the hard details? And for example, we don't reinvent the wheel. We integrate with SWR and React Query. So we have other examples that wrap WunderGraph, the WunderGraph TypeScript client, which is typesafe, and we wrap this with SWR and React Query. So you get the benefits of React Query with WunderGraph RPC functions, and you can just call your virtual graph. And you know, if you look at this, you might be thinking, I'm doing GraphQL, right? It looks like GraphQL, it feels like GraphQL. It's not GraphQL, and you don't care, and it's secure. And for example, if you define an input, let's go back to, that's a great exercise. Let's make this more dynamic. Go to your Rawkode operation, and does SpaceX ships, does it, does it have any kind of input? Like, can we on ships, can we define any kind of dynamic parameter?
Let's see. Yes, it's got find, and it's got limits, offsets, and sorts. So I guess we could.
Let's just add a limit or something.
Okay. So let's test this works. Let's do limit 5.
No, we need to define a.
I just wanted to make sure it worked in this API first.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So this is our new operation.
Make it, but not hard code. Make it a variable. So you define a variable after query. Okay, you know GraphQL bit, right? Yeah. You know the variable starts with $. Yes.
Yeah. I can't remember the exact syntax, but it seems to be yelling at me.
It is offset and then colon And I guess it needs to be int.
Oh yeah, okay, cool.
Yes. Is that correct?
It's
Or
just
is
complaining that it's a capital
I?
I.
Capital I.
Type system.
Yeah. Okay. And those
Okay,
are optional, right?
yes.
Okay. Copy this into your Rawkode operation. Okay. Save it. Now let's go to curl and run it again, like before. Okay, and like go cursor up, so we can type it again, and then add a query parameter, offset, for example, or whatever it was. Did that work? Maybe we need to do like limit, I think.
Yeah, let's do one.
Yes. So now we've created a REST API that takes those parameters. Try to set limit equals true. That's a bad request because we have JSON schema validation on this endpoint that validates it must be a number.
Okay. So I want to make sure I understand this correctly. Every time we define an operation, we're writing GraphQL as a way to introspect whatever APIs are being stitched together by the API proxy. Behind the scenes, this is actually generating the TypeScript SDK or client based on all of the type inferences it can make against those different things, which is why we have the ability to say from here to understand what this actually returns. So I'm curious, how do can I add the limit as a query parameter to the
yeah,
query?
that should be a field. It's called, I think, input. Yep.
And it's all typed as well. That is really cool. I like that, because then I can just, I don't remember how to write code anymore. I don't know if I say that enough, but I rely on VS Code and language server protocols and type systems more now than ever, and I've been doing this for 20 years. Like, it just, I now just fall back on it because it's just so easy, and it's usually smarter than I am, which I really appreciate. So, yeah,
but
nice.
you know, let's say, so now we have this operation, and let's say the result that we're getting back, it is not making us happy. We want to customize it. We want to do better. We should go fully custom because we want to manipulate the data before returning to the client, right?
Okay.
Let's create a TypeScript function to do that. So if we go to our operations directory, create a TypeScript file with a unique name we didn't use before, so not Rawkode again. And Jens. Okay, awesome. And then you start typing create export default. Sorry, that's the convention, export default. Create operation.
What's a create operation?
Just type create operation. Yeah, import this and then dot query. And then function with input and stuff. Yeah, make an object, create a handler. It's an async func that takes, yes. And
Copilot is kind of driving.
Copilot is great. And return an object like hello or whatever you want. Okay, and save this. Awesome. And go to your frontend code and call Jens as operation name.
Now we're getting that our inputs are invalid. I'm assuming because there's none. So
just remove. Yeah. Okay.
So does that mean we can?
Does our frontend now? Yeah, call it. Let's call Jens.
Okay.
So before we were like, okay, we're talking API dependencies. Now we want to build something custom. And next step is you put it together. So you go back to your Jens function, and there you have the CTX. So make some room for a CTX dot internal client dot queries, and then Rawkode. And that's an async thing. Yeah, limit to whatever you want. Okay. And put it into an object like const what you want. And then you can do some manipulation.
It's yelling at me because it's the potential undefined nature, obviously.
Ships is ships.
Well, what I'll do is I'll just do response data. What's that? Oh, it could be undefined. All right. Well, TypeScript is pretty smart, so as long as we say return blah, that frees this up, and we can map over all the ships and join. In fact, I could just join it, couldn't I? No, because I need the name.
I think after ships you need a question mark.
But the map should work over an the map should work on an empty list, right?
But it's not an empty list. It can be undefined.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's try calling this.
All right, let's change the limit. Cool. So using these completely TypeScript-based handlers, we can call any of the other queries through this internal client, which gives us back the typed response. We can mutate that data however we want and then spit it straight back out. That's pretty cool.
Go to your front-end code. And add an input. Like, no, we don't yet have an input, right? Let's go back to the function. Let's go back to the function. Yes. Yeah, add an input, and that's a Zod object. So besides import create operation, after create operation, just add comma Z. And then create an object. And here we can, we could make a limit, like, and make it a number, right? Yeah, Z number. Okay, and then instead of passing 5, pass CTX input limit. Yep. Go to your front end and add the input object. Okay, limit. Does our front end work?
No, because we changed the data structure.
Oh.
Although it's actually not complaining about the data structure. It's complaining about random other stuff. So maybe it does work. How did I get to the front end? It was
localhost 3K, I think.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay. And now something interesting that we, where we took some inspiration from TRPC. If you go back to your function, where we call it the input, for example, if you change number, just out of, like, it doesn't make sense, but change number to string and go to your front end code. No, the front end code, sorry. and go to the input, you will see it pops an error immediately. And that's because we're exposing, or we infer the TypeScript types from the ZOT object definition, and we export it with export type and import type into the front end behind the scenes. Like you didn't see that. If you look into generated Next.js, you will see it actually. But we have a direct connection between front end code and back end code. And that gives you this immediate feedback loop if you're creating TypeScript functions.
Yeah, that's one of those big selling points about TRPC that people always rave about, is the fact that you get this consistency across the types for backend and front end, and it's
yeah,
very cool.
So what you get here is a smooth transition between, oh, I just create a GraphQL operation. That's enough. Until you reach a point where you say, it needs to be customized. I need to call 5 APIs and combine them in a certain way, and I want to manipulate the data because it's not in the right shape we need for the front end. And then you go the TypeScript route, and you can always choose like what is the way to go. But you see from the front end experience, like the front end client, it didn't change a bit. It is the same experience, and that's what we're trying to do. We try to make a very smooth transition between I'm just calling a service and it's fine, the way the data comes back is okay, to I need to build something custom. But from a client perspective, it's the same interface, nothing new to learn, nothing to change.
Yeah, it's really interesting because WunderGraph is in this space where I can't really work out who it competes with because it does so much. Like, do you know, as a founder, right? Do you see WunderGraph as competing with the likes of Hasura or with TRPC, with both, with Tyke? Like, where do you position it? Where do you feel that this is? This is a weird question.
WunderGraph is in the category where you collapse 7 tools into one, and you're like,
yeah,
so I'm now, I don't know, more than 10 years in IT. And I learned so many things about, this is what I said before, why I created WunderGraph. So many things I hate doing because it's boring and repetitive. And WunderGraph is the result that gives you, in the end, the stack where you don't have to do the mundane things again. Like, the way we just transitioned between TypeScript and GraphQL, the same way you could now add an OpenID Connect provider like Auth0, and then you have authentication. And what is special about WunderGraph here is we kind of, in some way, like, obviously it's not the main purpose, but we are similar to something like Firebase, but we don't dictate a specific backend. You can say, I have my GraphQL, I have my REST, I have my database. We don't tell you where those need to be and which provider. We also don't tell you what authentication provider to use. It could be Auth0, it could be Clerk. With WunderGraph, you can glue it together in a coherent developer experience that feels like it is Firebase, but the components can be anything that you bring. And so we're kind of like an anti-vendor lock-in tool. At the same time, it feels like we are a vendor lock-in tool because it feels like it's one experience, but you can bring the components, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm trying to think of some use cases that I think are quite novel and interesting here. One of the things that always frustrates me about GraphQL is aggregate root functions, like trying to get counts while querying data. I think it's very difficult to kind of stitch those things together. I'm curious, can we Can we try and do that with WunderGraph and see what that looks like? And what I mean is, what I'd really love to be able to do, and this might be so easy that you're just gonna go like, ha, sure. But what if we query all the dragons, get in their names, but also return the number of active dragons as well as the number of total dragons? Like, to me, if I were doing this with GraphQL, it would be a bit of a pain. I'm curious if we can make that a nice API with WunderGraph. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it, but I would love to show off one feature of WunderGraph. Maybe we can do a cross API join.
That sounds even more exciting. Let's do that.
Okay. Can you go to the WunderGraph config TS? Just want to check if we have the dependencies we need. Okay, we have countries, we have weather. Okay, let's create a new operation. We call it join.
All right. Is that a TypeScript or GraphQL operation?
GraphQL. Okay, and let's start with countries. Countries and then countries. No, just do countries, country. Otherwise, I don't want to make too many API calls. Yeah, country, ID, name, and capital.
I don't think ID is a thing.
Yeah, ID is cool. And it takes a parameter, I think, the country code. Yeah, code, make that a variable. I think it's ID, capital ID.
No.
No, instead of string, it should be capital ID.
Oh, sorry. All right, okay.
Yeah, ID is a very weird scalar in GraphQL because it can be, according to the specification, it can be a string or a number. Like, it's kind of like a union. You know, we're talking about input unions for 700 years already, and they still are not in the spec. But we already have an input union, which is ID. It can be int or number or string. Okay, so that's our starting point. Let's curl it. Or no, you installed Postman. Let's Postman it. Now it's time for Postman. Okay. Click import.
I've never used Postman before. Give me a moment. Where's import? Oh,
top,
there we go.
Top. Yeah, there. And select our generated directory from our project in the examples thingy.
What's it called? Dot WunderGraph, right?
Yep.
Not finding it.
Are you in the directory of the project?
Oh no, it's in the examples. Yeah, all right, okay.
Yeah. Examples, then TypeScript, Next.js, TypeScript functions, I think.
Generated. So the whole generated directory?
No, generated. There should be some file, a JSON file with Postman in the name. Like, I don't know, something Postman
I said
collection.
Directory, so maybe we need to do this. Oh, come on. How do we show dot files on this thing?
Control Shift dot.
Control. All right. No, I don't think it. I'm going to Google it. macOS Finder show dot files.
Or is it Command Shift dot? Let me check.
Maybe it just doesn't work in this little. Well, let's drag it in.
Yeah, you can drag it also.
Who'd have thought macOS Finder would be our downfall? Yeah, it's okay. So dot files work from here, just not in that little thing. Okay, so generated, and then we want a Postman JSON.
Yeah, that's good. Cool, and then pop up WunderGraph queries. And what was? Is it the join? Okay, and now you can call it. Ah, yeah, you need to click the button for code and put some code. Okay, we have London. That's a starting point. So that's for the people who like to share an API they've created. So WunderGraph by default creates a Postman collection in the generated folder from all your operations, and that way you can send the Postman collection to your users, and now you can they can explore your REST API you created.
Nice, I like it. So now we're going to add the weather to this, right?
Yeah, now we want weather for a capital. So after code, you make a little space, and we need a new variable, which is going to be after code in the variable definition. Yeah, we make a city variable, which is a string, and after the variable, we type an at internal. No, not internal operation, just at internal. Yes, okay. That's something, it's a convention, but this means we now have a space to store something. And after capital in line 4, you can now write at export right behind capital. In line 4, after capital. Not before, after. Sorry.
I bet you wish you had done the typing now.
Yeah, it's a yes. Just follow Postman.
Copilot.
Yeah. Copilot, yes. So when we execute the field capital, we export the value into the variable. Oh, not capital, but city. Export it into city. Okay. And now we use another feature that is WunderGraph specific. So make a new line after line 4 and type _join. Yes. And then like braces and stuff. And what it does is join embeds a second query type. Like remove this on stuff, it's wrong. Like, yeah. So this embeds a second query into the first. So now you can start with weather. Weather get city by name, and then just pick some fields. Weather, blah blah, summary, temperature. I think you need to select on summary. Description, yep. I can title.
This is fun.
Yep. Wind. Okay, we get everything.
I have a query. Ooh.
Cool. Okay, save this.
I didn't have to look up any documentation for this API whatsoever. I was just all completing my way through every moment.
Yeah, that's fun. And by the way, the more you use Copilot for this, like for me, I don't know why, but for me it auto completes weather and stuff automatically. Like it somehow knows about these APIs already.
Okay, so let's go back to Postman.
Yes, and just call it. Yeah, that's it. We joined two APIs.
Nice. It's almost like magic.
Almost. Like it's kind of like a join, but not tables, but across APIs.
Yeah, and it just reflects the structure of this query here. So I'm assuming like the GraphQL approach, you can throw these things together pretty quickly, and if you want to change the shape of it, you just create the TypeScript function and call it that way. Like, because I'm assuming we could do the exact same in TypeScript with, let's see. So if I wanted to get the city, I'm feeling too brave now. This is going to be my downfall. Country, input, code. I'm not going to worry about the variables. So that should fetch my city, and then I could do weather. And there is a question coming, but I'm trying to get through this first. And city, which is going to be our city.data, capital name, or maybe that is the name. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then my response could just be whatever shape of data I want. So we'll call this capital and temperature. It's complaining.
It's ridiculous. City is probably requesting a string, not string or undefined, right?
I mean, I guess I could just default this to the.
Something is wrong with weather temperature.
Oh.
Get city by name. You see, Copilot needs to learn a little more about what you're doing here.
Okay. So now our Jens API could take an input, but I've hard-coded it to GP, which is then going to go fetch the weather, and then I define the shape of the data that gets turned back to the client. So if we come to Jens, I broke it.
No, you need to put an input. You're ignoring it, but it's still in the JSON schema validation.
See, this is very interesting. Like that was just so easy to decide that I want to expose 2 bits of information to people when they give me a country code, as I want to tell them the name of the capital and the actual temperature, and I can just dictate that. Like now we have this system. You know, let me back up a bit, because I want to make sure that I get the importance of this in my head across. It's like we have this divide, right? And I'll use a product like Hasura as a demonstration here, right? Really great product, but very operational centric. Like, so, you know, some team manages it, they connect it to a database to define the schema. Like a front end developer is not going to come along, modify the Hasura metadata to expose the data that they want in the format that they want, etc. But WunderGraph changes that because we have this TypeScript API to everything, which is very familiar to both backend developers, full stack developers, and front end developers, where it can coexist in a mono repository with a generated client, live side by side, is that the front end developer can come along and say, actually, I want an API endpoint that returns data that looks like this. They stitch a few things together and they've got what they need, and they can do it all in the same pull request and update their client code at the same time. And that's an enabler that I just don't think these other products offer in this space. And I hope that that makes sense to people and it's not just waffle dribbling out my mouth, but it's just such a powerful feature.
Yeah. You know, one more thing. Now go to the front end code and check what is the response shape gonna look like. Like here we call Jens, so the name is dragons, and check what is the response type of dragons. So if you in line 15, if you type dragons, or here, yeah, data, you see you have capital and temperature. That's what we returned from our API.
Mm-hmm. Nice. I could have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I just seen everybody's comments trying to tell me how to show the dot files. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, you have a helpful community.
Yeah. All right. And Abdo's saying, and no need for a GUI like Hasura. Yeah, I mean, Hasura, you use the web interface to configure everything, or you can use their YAML metadata. It's a bit awkward. Especially for me when I do want everything to be code. It's like my default now is just going to be not to ship Hasura anywhere and just to create a WunderGraph API, because then I have this dynamic ability to duplicate my queries if I want with different names, version them if I wanted to, because we can do that as code, and change the shape of things by writing these TypeScript handlers. Like, it's just very nifty. I like it. All right.
You know,
sorry, on you go.
Just to comment on this, the problem with user interfaces is if someone wants to replicate what we just did, you just type the code. You can follow the code. If we had to click buttons, you cannot store button clicks in Git. If you want to follow what we just did here, the combination, all this stuff, you can now put it in a Git repo, and everybody would understand how we change these operations, how we define the Jens operation. Like, everything is in Git. It is versioned automatically. If you click buttons, you first have to think about, okay, how can we do like a revision or embed a revision system into the user interface so that people can understand what changes were made to the system last night, because this morning everything is breaking.
Yep.
So everything in WunderGraph, everything you change to your WunderGraph application, it's visible because it's code. You put it in Git. There's no GUI because I don't want a GUI. You know, everything we just did, we always kept typing and it was efficient. And this is what I said in the beginning. TypeScript is the interface for developers. It's the perfect developer interface. We don't need buttons or GUIs. We need good TypeScript definitions so that we don't have to think about what is limit. Is it a number? The IDE tells you. You know, you can just type away. Also, GraphQL with its amazing auto completion, just type away, you know?
All right, we're getting pretty close to time, and I've been showing things that I just thought were interesting. Is there anything else from these example repositories that you would like to show people before we finish up today?
No, I think we're pretty much at the core. Like, you could now add authentication, you could add more services like federation, stuff like that. In the end, the DX would be very similar. Like, you know, you have use query here. You could also import use auth, and whatever auth provider you add, you can just call it. You don't have to add any other dependencies. No, I think Ray just mentions directives. Yeah, okay. We can talk about role-based access if you want. Like, okay, we don't have enough time for adding authentication now, but if you go to one of the operations, like dragons, for example, and after dragons you type @RBAC, yes, and then open open the function, yes, and you could say require match all and make an array. And inside this array, put admin, yep, save it, and call this function, and you will see it will not work because we don't have role admin.
401.
Yeah, so you could now add an authentication provider, and we have a callback function like a hook where when someone authenticates, you can write a TypeScript function to give them roles, and you can define what roles exist in your realm. And now you could say, okay, if my name is Rawkode or my email is something Rawkode, whatever, I give myself the role admin, and then you would be allowed to actually use this this operation. But
and I'm assuming that's possible in a TypeScript too.
You can write CTX user, and you can say roles, and
or includes.
Okay. Yes, something like this.
How do I return like a 401 then?
Yeah, that's the missing feature I'm currently working on.
All right.
Like we released functions Tuesday this week.
Oh wow.
And
okay, so that's pretty fresh off the. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty fresh, and we need to add a way of returning unauthorized. But yeah.
Oh, I've got, if it does include admin. Okay, so that should give me an error.
Yeah, I think it will actually time out because we're not yet properly handling those errors. You caught us on the alpha stage here.
Hey, you gave me TypeScript functions, and I want to start using them for everything now. So I'll get that feature request in for the ability to augment the response. All right, that's awesome. Let me put us back into big face mode. So what I would say is, if you have any questions and you're watching, you've got a couple of minutes to drop them into the chat while Jens and I have a quick conversation. So just first, thank you. This is a really cool project. I've got so many different use cases that I literally, I reached out because I was experimenting with using this. I have real things that I want to do with it, and I just thought, you know what, this is cool. So thank you for spending time with me today and showing us this. Why don't you give us a little bit of a flavor on where you're going with WunderGraph? Like, what does the next 3 months or 6 months look like? What are your priorities? What's coming down the line for people that are curious?
Yes. So in the next couple of weeks, we launch so our cloud is currently in alpha stage. We launch our cloud to beta. Which means from, like, you now have a repo with a .wundergraph folder, and in WunderGraph Cloud, you select this repo from your Git repo, and then everything gets deployed automatically in whatever location you want. You get analytics, you get edge caching, you get like what you would expect from an API deployment thing. And what's on the roadmap is, like, we want to bring collaboration so you can work with the team. We want to closely integrate with services like Vercel. So your front end on Vercel, your backend on WunderGraph. And another super important thing for me is when you integrate APIs, what is kind of like apparent is it doesn't always work. Like, let's say you have an operation. It needs to call into 3 services to complete a workflow, like get some data from Stripe, put some data in your database, and call another service to send an email and whatnot. And this can fail sometimes. So what we are also bringing to WunderGraph is something quite similar to temporal. So I call this feature WunderGraph machines, which will be resilient state machines, essentially. So background workers, but not background workers as you think, like much more elegant, kind of like a React component, but it's a state machine. And you can retry things, and you can design long-running operations and workflows and crons. And we will also be adding an event system, so like a pub/sub system where you can, for example, send an event to a WunderGraph machine, and it can react to that because it's a state machine. And you can subscribe to events by a state machine. which gives you a whole new way of designing applications. And all this, again, TypeScript interface, very elegant. You can call it from your functions, etc. And the real purpose here is to, most people, when we talk about APIs, we talk about, okay, let's create some CRUD things. And that's really the simple stuff. But what the developer experience I want to create is resilient, long-running state machines where if a user signs up with your SaaS application, you can actually create a state machine for this user, and you can send events to this state machine whenever you want. And this can transition the state machine into different states. Like, for example, if you want to create something like Vercel, you can have a state machine for your organization. And if someone wants to join this organization, you can send it an event. So in a state machine or a WunderGraph machine, it will have like a storage. And what's also very important is it's going to be serverless. So you don't have to think about where does it run? Does it actually run? Is it sleeping or whatnot? Because it can sleep and it will cost you nothing if it sleeps. And the whole thing is to rethink APIs and workflows, because sometimes, when we do a deployment in WunderGraph, what we do is we go to fly.io. That's the provider where we run our stuff on. And we do a bunch of API calls, like we create an application. They call this application. Then you create a Fly machine. You have to build an image. You have to deploy that image. And this takes, for the first run, about 2 minutes, and subsequent builds around like 20 seconds. And this is a very long-running operation. And similar to temporal, we want to allow you to build in a very elegant way, kind of like React components, but without returning HTML, just return state. We want to allow you to build resilient state machines so that you can define workflows, you can define crunch, you can just define state in your application in a whole new way. And it's going to be fun. It's such a pain in the ass if you want to build something like WunderGraph today and you have to integrate with partners like Fly. It is so hard to build resilient functions. You cannot just call Fly and everything flies, because sometimes it doesn't. How do you retry? And of course I can have temporal, but now I need someone who understands temporal and deploys it. Or do I use the cloud, and how do I embed it into my thing? And what I really just want to do is, I call from my front end, I can call a function, and for my function, I can call a WunderGraph machine, and that's everything I need. And so we really try to unpack the hard things into super simple solutions that everybody can understand. And I think even a front-end developer with some experience will be able to build resilient workflows and long-running operations with WunderGraph machines. So that's what's going to come in the next month.
In the next month? Wow. Or months?
Yeah, months.
All right. We'll definitely have to get something else scheduled then to do a follow-up.
I would love to.
That would be amazing.
I would love to.
One question in the comments, and then I'll let you go, because I know that it's also getting quite late for you over there. But Abdo is asking, what other data sources are on your roadmap for WunderGraph?
Yes. So currently, I would say something that is very interesting for us is gRPC and async API, or more specifically Kafka. So super interesting. By the way, we also want to expose gRPC from WunderGraph. So recently we thought about, we have those JSON RPC operations, which we currently, we have our own spec, how we do JSON RPC, and we can create a Postman collection. It would actually be quite simple for us to also add a gRPC endpoint, which means everybody who can generate a gRPC client in Python, Ruby, Java, whatever, can call your WunderGraph API. So you get a hell of a lot more options for people to call your API. I think that's amazing. And regarding origins, yeah, I think Kafka and message brokers like RabbitMQ, super important that you can go like async. And also gRPC, just as an internal system. I think that's very important. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention for the roadmap is we are also going to be focusing a lot on WunderGraph Hub in the future. You know, when we started talking, I spoke about API dependencies and API package manager. And one core feature of WunderGraph that we want to focus more in the future is actually sharing APIs. Like when you do introspect GraphQL and introspect something else, it means that you need to be able to introspect those. But what if someone could just share an NPM package with you, and that's your import, and it will be typesafe out of the box? So what we're building is like an NPM for APIs where I can build a collection of my internal APIs, publish them to the hub, and the rest of my team or another company, they can then import those APIs and add them to their virtual graph. And that makes using and reusing APIs a lot, or sharing a lot easier. And we want to definitely also focus on that. And yeah, just give people a way of sharing APIs. You know, sharing is caring.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that roadmap with us as well. And it's great to see. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting stuff there that you're trying to tackle. The state machine temporal thing is something, again, that resonates. I think we play with all the same technologies. That's the current theme I'm seeing here, is that we have very similar interests. I host my own temporal cluster on a Kubernetes cluster. And it's hard. But I want the semantics, because temporal has this concept of activities where you have this guarantee that things could be retried if they fail, and like really strict error handling. And I do want an easier API for that. Like, I don't want to host my own temporal. So consider me user number one for when you have something there with the state
You
machine.
know, we just defined a TypeScript function, right? And I believe creating a resilient workflow should be as simple as creating another TypeScript functions. And with WunderGraph Cloud, you don't deploy anything, and you don't even switch context. You just create like a, I don't know, export default, create machine something, and it will be resilient. And that's just it. Like, yeah, don't worry about stuff. You know, like for your business purpose, how much does it actually matter? And is it not a waste of time? And we know the answer is yes, that you run your own Kubernetes cluster and temporal. Like, you know, it can break. You have to understand temporal. Maybe there's something like you need to patch it. Like, I guess it's a great exercise for you to run it on your own. And I don't know, like running Kubernetes on your own is like such a pain in the ass. Like everything can go wrong. And if you're building, you know, this is the thing, you only learn if you're a startup founder. You have so much pressure. You really want to outsource everything that has nothing to do with your business. So for us, I would never allow anybody to run a Kubernetes cluster if we're not past like Series A or something, and we have so much money that we really don't care, you know.
I mean, teaching people Kubernetes is pretty much where 90% of my income comes, from helping people operate Kubernetes. So I really do need to be good at it. So,
Okay, yeah. In that case, obviously, sure. As a teacher, it makes
but
sense, I guess.
temporal, no, I don't have to be running my own temporal cluster, and I prefer not to. But I've looked at the pricing of temporal cloud, and like, fuck that. Like, there's no way I'm giving them that money when I can fight it myself. So, all right. Again, thank you so much for spending time with me. Really cool project. We'll definitely reach out in a month when you have the state machine stuff ready. I'm going to hold you to that date now. I'll stick it on a flyer somewhere, and we'll get
Yes.
something else scheduled. But have a wonderful evening. Go spend some time with your kids if it's not their bedtime yet, and I will speak to you again soon.
Thank you, man. It was super cool. Ciao,
All
ciao.
right. Have a great day. Bye.
Rawkode